We've all heard the age-old jargon. This running back's going into a contract year. His team is going to feed him the football. But is that actually true? And what running backs do we need to pay attention to from a contract perspective this year? In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down 10 running back contracts that you need to follow in Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues. Last week, I tackled wide receivers. If you want to check that video out, if you enjoyed any point, you know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe. Let's get into it. All right, so as I discussed in the wide receiver video, inspiration for the idea for this one came from an article that I read last week, a week and a half ago, by Brandon Niles on 4for4, where he basically broke down the hit rates and things of that nature for players performing better in a contract season, and it sparked this video idea for me. So you go check out the article if you guys are interested. But to summarize the running back section, since that's the position we are covering in this video, on average, the percentage increase of production from their previous 3 or whatever years of their contract to their contract year performance, running backs improved on average 3.8% of their fantasy production. So I think conventional wisdom would say that the running back position would be the biggest beneficiary of the contract year narrative because it's an opportunity-based position. If they're in a contract year, teams don't usually want to pay running backs. They just feed them, run them into the ground until they have nothing left in the tank, and then the team just lets them walk in free agency. But tight end and wide receiver were actually the biggest percentage increase according to this data, and I broke that down in the wide receiver video as well. But given that running back is a volume-based position, is an opportunity-based position, I think it is kind of important to add the added context of the running back having a volume projection, because what Brandon looked at was just like all running backs from that draft class are in a contract year that were going to be set to be UFAs. But I think it's important to narrow it down potentially to the running backs like going in the top 30, top 40 of ADP or so, because those running backs actually have a volume projection in front of them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be going high in fantasy football drafts. And if we look over the last couple of years, we've seen some guys ball out in contract years at the running back position. Most recently, we saw Saquon Barkley do it this past year. We saw Tony Pollard do it this past year, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, and Jamal Williams. And some of these guys weren't all that productive before then, especially Sanders and Jamal Williams and Pollard to some degree as a guy sharing a backfield. Back in 2021, we saw Cordell Patterson do it, James Conner, Leonard Fournette, Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, Chris Carson, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry, and Kareem Hunt did it in 2020. And then in 2019, Derrick Henry also did it because he played on the franchise tag in 2020. And then Kenyon Drake and Austin Ekeler as well. So all of these guys kind of performed during their contract year because they were, set to have a volume projection. So let's get into some of the big running back contract situations. And with each of these guys, I'm going to outline their outlook as well as the other members of their backfield, how things would change if they were to move on in free agency or whatever the impact, the ripple effect might be. So let's start it off with the guys that are playing on the franchise tag this year because they had good years last year: Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, and Tony Pollard. Let me just start by saying I don't think running backs should be allowed to be franchise tagged because the tag is used for other positions, usually because they're trying to work out a long-term deal, and we know at running back, teams don't usually want to pay them, and I think it's just the team slapping the tag on somebody to use them for one more year and then let them walk on into free agency. All of these guys make for premier trade targets if you guys are contending, because all 3 of them are set to have good volume projections. They all finished top 8 in points per game last year, and other than Josh Jacobs with maybe the Jimmy Garoppolo situation, Saquon's in a good spot to get another big workload. Tony Pollard with Zeke gone is in a spot to get a big workload, and assuming Jimmy Garoppolo is on the field, I think Josh Jacobs should be well set up to repeat as a top 10 running back again. The video I dropped on Monday about the running back age and touch apex doesn't quite apply to these running backs yet, because even though they're like bordering on, 1,000 carries and that kind of thing, they should have one more productive year and then they'll probably get thrown to the wolves in free agency. So if you're in a contending window and you're trying to make a push to be a top team in your league, I think these guys are the type of players that I would be shopping for, because I don't think they're going to fall off a cliff come next year this time. And who knows, maybe some of these guys actually get extended by next season or maybe during the season at some point. We're also talking about the ripple effect of the players potentially moving on. Like I said, I'm personally not really interested in anybody behind these guys on the depth chart. I don't really like Zamir White. I didn't think he was a good prospect. He's behind Josh Jacobs currently on the depth chart right now. Eric Gray is kind of just sitting behind Saquon Barkley as maybe a pass catching back. I'm not too interested in him long term as well. I think these guys are probably just going to get one more year of big production, and then their teams are likely going to replace them in the draft or in free agency, or maybe one of these guys gets a long-term contract. So So let's move on to the second guy of this video, which is Jonathan Taylor. Right now, RB3 per keep trade cut. His performance will be very interesting this year, and I think it will dictate kind of how his contract situation plays out, because he was a second-round pick in 2020, and spoiler alert, a lot of these guys were in the 2020 draft because they're up on their final year of their contract. So he is a UFA after this year, and based on his 2021 season, I would have said that this is a guy that might actually get extended by the team that drafted him, maybe get a 2-year deal, 3-year deal, 4-year deal, whatever. But he does have to bounce back after what happened last year when he was dealing with injuries, a little bit of inconsistent play. Anthony Richardson coming in as a rookie quarterback is going to need Jonathan Taylor. He's going to need to rely on him, especially given that this backfield will be borderline unstoppable with two of the best athletes at their position across the entire NFL. What I expect to happen is Jonathan Taylor has a bounce back season this year, probably finishes as a top 8, top 6, top 5 fantasy football running back, and then he'll either get extended by Indianapolis or he'll probably get franchise tagged more likely. Best case scenario for Jonathan Taylor is that if he balls out in 2023, he can sign maybe a long-term extension or get tagged, and Anthony Richardson's on his way to becoming like the next Justin Fields, and you have a guy along with a quarterback rushing threat out of the backfield that is going to be a big-time beneficiary of that offense going very run-heavy. I would say a ripple effect of this situation, maybe stash Evan Hull on your taxi squad, because even if Jonathan Taylor is on the field and stays there long-term, he could carve out the new like Nyheim Hines type of role. But either way, I'm not too invested in any other running back on this Colts team. I think if JT were to move on, they would probably just draft a guy to replace him. So number 3 running back situation to pay attention to is Austin Ekeler, running back 13 per keep trade cut right now. He is entering the final year of his contract. We've already kind of heard whispers that he's voicing displeasure with that contract because he signed it a couple years ago before he was like a top tier elite fantasy running back. And the Chargers did add about $2 million in incentives to keep him in Los Angeles, to keep him from holding out this year. But Ekeler is really difficult because I think a lot of people will assume that because Austin Ekeler is a pass-catching running back, he can probably play well into his like 30s or something like that. But he is going to be 29 years old this time next year, and he's going to be a UFA. So if he doesn't have like a monster season again, if he deals with any injury, whatever the case is, there's a lot of risk around Austin Ekeler. I think he could very well just be a one-year asset as far as like RB1 production is concerned, and then maybe goes on to be like a flex play elsewhere. But what happens if Austin Ekeler deals with an injury this year? If he misses 5, 6, 7 games, it's going to tank his value. He's RB13 right now per keep trade cut, and if he falls off efficiency-wise, if he deals with injury, he is over the age and touch apex for running backs. Unless you are absolutely a top 3 unequivocal best team in your league, you should sell Austin Ekeler in fantasy right now. History suggests that this might be his last RB1 projection of his career. Given his age, given the touches that he has under his belt, I would much rather swap Austin Ekeler out for a Travis Etienne if people are down on him. Swap him out for Josh Jacobs to get potentially more youth on your side. Austin Ekeler's a little bit dangerous. As good as he could be from a redraft perspective, he also could deal with injuries. He also could fall off in value. I'm not totally ready to give up on Isaiah Spiller, who's behind him. He was hurt last year, so he's worth a late, like, 3rd-round investment, or stash him late in a startup, or stash him on your taxi squad if he's available. They could have added somebody to this backfield, and honestly, I expected them to be in on a guy like Zach Charbonnet or something like that in the draft. Austin Ekeler doesn't really have a real handcuff right now outside of Isaiah Spiller. And he was extremely young coming out of Texas A&M. So I don't think he would suddenly become a workhorse in this offense, but I do think he might be more valuable than he showed as a rookie, and I think he's an okay stash in the case that Austin Ekeler deals with injury or moves on in free agency. Maybe he can work in tandem with a new back in 2024. So number 4 on this list is J.K. Dobbins, RB16 per keep trade cut, a member of the 2020 running back class that I'm about to rattle off a bunch of names from. I love J.K. Dobbins. You guys know this. He is one of the best mid-round values, in my opinion, from a redraft perspective and a dynasty perspective, similar to how we were viewing Josh Jacobs last year. Not by pure volume, because I don't think he's going to get the same workload that Josh Jacobs got, because Lamar Jackson's going to eat into his work. Gus Edwards is probably going to eat into his work and limit his ceiling to some degree. But if J.K. Dobbins can carve out a 60-70% opportunity share workload, he's going to be really valuable from a fantasy perspective. Let me paint a picture real quick of this Ravens offense. We have a running back who's been hyper efficient over the course of his career. Since entering the league, he's averaged over 6 yards per touch, 6 yards per carry as a rookie. Unfortunately, he tears his knee up going into his second season, in the preseason of his second year, before we could get to see the monster jump that I really expected J.K. Dobbins to take. Obviously, that impacts him this year as well, because it was a multi-ligament ACL tear. He was working his way back. Mid-season this year, he had to have a procedure to clean up his knee, but he came back in week 14, and he posted 90 total yards in 4 out of his last 5 games to close out the season. Like I said, he averaged 6 yards per carry as a rookie, 5.7 this past season, despite being without Lamar Jackson for most of that time, being 1 year removed from a multi-ligament ACL tear, and the second most defenders in the box according to Player Profiler. He is explosive, he's a great receiving back, and he is primed and ready to prove himself for an extension. The Athletic's Jeff Zrebiec, who covers the Ravens professionally, wrote in an OTA recap article this past week that J.K. Dobbins is looking for a long-term extension from the Ravens. He wants to stay in Baltimore long-term, and the team believes that he can become a starting running back. What does that look like for fantasy? I know some of you guys might be concerned about receiving volume because Lamar Jackson won't check down very often. You might be concerned about goal line work, that kind of stuff. But here's what gives me confidence aside from J.K. Dobbins' raw talent. Number one, there's better weapons in this offense than there's pretty much ever been over the course of Lamar Jackson's career. The coaching staff has now improved with Todd Monken coming in. They're probably going to throw the ball a little bit more, and that could lead to more pass-catching volume for J.K. Dobbins. Number two, J.K. Dobbins is now healthy, which means that he'll probably be on the field getting more touches, getting more snaps. And number three, Mark Ingram finished as a top 10 running back in his age 29 season, playing in an offense in 2019 that barely threw the ball, and he only had 230 touches. And like I said, he was over the hill. He was washed up. What do you think that a healthy J.K. Dobbins can do, who's in the prime of his career, and he is ready to explode, and he's already been efficient over the course of his career? High risk, high reward type of option for contenders, in my opinion. But when going after a high risk guy like J.K. Dobbins, I like to be able to justify the talent of the player, which I can absolutely do, the offense that he's playing in, and the upside case. For me, I don't think he's ever going to be a 70-target running back. I think he can catch 30 or 40 passes next year, but he can score 10, 12, 15 touchdowns if this offense gets back to the level that they've played at in years past. The ripple effect of this, obviously, is Gus Edwards, who is also a free agent, also in a contract year as well. If the run game disappoints again, Dobbins and Edwards don't get it done, they deal with injuries, whatever the case is, they're both likely going to get let go. My prediction is that Dobbins balls out, he gets tagged, he gets extended, whatever, and Gus Edwards walks in free agency, and maybe they bring in another guy to complement J.K. Dobbins. That is the situation that I see playing itself out. Dobbins is one of my biggest buys in Dynasty right now, especially at the running back position. Moving on to number 5 on this list, DeAndre Swift. Running back 19, according to Keep Trade Cut. He moves over from one really good offense last year in the Detroit Lions, who finished top 5 in points per game, to another good offense. He goes to the Philadelphia Eagles. In my opinion, I think he has a lot more concerns than some people are willing to admit. I think the average fantasy player sees the splits that he showed in Detroit when he was getting the volume and when he was getting receiving work especially, but I think Dan Campbell is a good coach, and I think there's a reason that DeAndre Swift never commanded this massive workload over the course of a full season, and he was not maybe used correctly in some spots. I think it's something to do with DeAndre Swift himself. Maybe it's the fact that he can't stay healthy. Maybe it's that he doesn't work hard. I'm not exactly sure, but I do think it's ironic that DeAndre Swift is replacing Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders was a guy who was often injured, who was often inconsistent, just like DeAndre Swift is, and got a boost from this offense this past year. Miles Sanders has the best season of his career, parlayed that into a big contract in Carolina. Could DeAndre Swift do the same? I definitely think it's possible, but I do expect the other running backs to be involved in this backfield. I think Jalen Hurts will impact DeAndre Swift negatively as well because he's a mobile quarterback. He's going to take away goal line work, red zone rushing work because he scored double-digit touchdowns on the ground last year, and he also is probably not going to throw to his running backs very often as well. I'm very inclined to sell DeAndre Swift because there is a truther in every single league. I'm sure somebody in your league loves DeAndre Swift, loves the new landing spot. In my opinion, I think he's just simply too risky, and I think the ceiling is lower than people are willing to admit. I think the ceiling projection for DeAndre Swift is he does what Miles Sanders did last year, which is be the starting back in this backfield, have like a top 20 season, but not necessarily a guy that I think can finish top 5 in points per game. He's not getting 7 targets per game like he was getting at times in Detroit because Jared Goff simply is going to check down more than Jalen Hurts. He's also not going to take away goal line work like Jalen Hurts will. So I think the ceiling is a little bit capped in this offense. And the ripple effect of this backfield is that this time next year, it might be all up in the air again because Rashaad Penny, who's the other back in this backfield, is also a UFA after this year. Pretty simple for me. Both guys could play their way out of Philadelphia and into bigger contracts, or maybe one of them gets brought back on the cheap by the Philadelphia Eagles. But I know, this team is not likely to pay a running back according to most of their, philosophies and things like that. So Number 6 on this list is Cam Akers, who's running back 24 per keep trade cut. Again, another member of the 2020 running back class. Also similar to the Miles Sanders situation, we've seen the ability for Cam Akers to command a workload. In 14 of his 29 career games, he's commanded at least 15 opportunities, which is pretty crazy considering this guy's dealt with an Achilles tear. He's been inconsistent. He asked for a trade at one point in time. So for him to command a big workload in nearly half of his games, I think that's pretty impressive. And a lot of those games actually came this year as well. It's his first season not being a rookie and not being a guy coming off of an Achilles tear, because in 2020 he was a rookie. 2021 he tore his Achilles in July, came back for the playoffs. 2022 he was 1 year removed from a torn Achilles. So this is a guy that actually has his best outlook, I would say, aside from the offense being a little bit worse than it used to be. We saw this guy quietly average 17.7 PPR points per game from week 13 on last year, including finishing as the RB1 overall in week 16. The Rams only added Zach Evans to this offense, who was a 6th round pick. Is it possible that a guy that I thought was a darling breakout candidate for multiple years finally hits? I think it's definitely possible that Cam Akers is actually very good this year, or at least solid this year. I like Cam Akers. The price point is fair for the risk, but the upside is similar to Miles Sanders. I think he could have an RB2 season for an offense that still has Matthew Stafford, still has Cooper Kupp. They're probably still going to move the ball. I don't think they're going to be the best offense in the league like I once thought Cam Akers might be a part of, but they should at least be a top 20 unit. So for me, Akers is a guy that I'm willing to buy into if the price point is low enough. I think you can get him for an early second to mid-second round pick at some in some leagues, and maybe even cheaper if people are really out on him. The ripple effect of this situation, there's got to be some Zach Evans truthers listening to this video. If Akers stinks, if he's injured, if he's inconsistent, if he goes on in free agency, Zach Evans has an upside case to become a contributing member of this backfield in the long term, but we don't really know what that entails because Stafford is up there in age, Cooper Kupp is up there in age. Zach Evans, if he becomes a long-term fixture in this backfield, and again, he was a 6th round pick. I wasn't very high on him coming out, but it's possible that he's a good stash, a good guy to go after late in rookie drafts and late in startup leagues. So number 7 on this list is A.J. Dillon, a running back of the 2020 running back class. You guessed it, running back 34 per keep trade cut. Dillon has been perpetually sharing a backfield his entire career with Aaron Jones especially, but one thing's pretty undeniable in my opinion. A.J. Dillon is big, he's fast, and he's one of the best handcuffs in fantasy, in addition to being a very talented pure runner of the ball, which I thought even going back to when I was scouting him coming out of Boston College. Aaron Jones is almost 29 years old. He has 1,277 career touches under his belt, including over 1,000 carries, and veteran running back since 2015. As I talked about in about August last year, I did a video called Don't Draft These Running Backs, Draft These Ones Instead. Running backs going inside the top 20 of ADP since 2015 have gotten injured, aka missed 6 or more games, on average 21% of the time, that are, veteran running backs, so 26 years old or older, and Aaron Jones is almost 29 years old right now. This offense wants to rely on the run game. They have a young quarterback, Jordan Love making his first, full year of starting. They're not going to throw it as much as they did when Aaron Rodgers was the quarterback. Dillon will have some flex appeal in redraft leagues. He has upside, of course, knowing that he's the handcuff to Aaron Jones, and also his price point is now at a point where I'm not totally out on him because he's always been so inflated by Aaron Rodgers. And now that Rodgers is gone, A.J. Dillon is actually attainable in a lot of leagues right now. We have the upside that Jones is gone either next year or that A.J. Dillon is gone because he is also an unrestricted free agent as well. There's so many ways that this backfield can break right. And A.J. Dillon has been a top 15 running back per PFF rushing grade every year of his career, including 2 top 5 seasons the last 2 seasons. So A.J. Dillon is a good, talented, pure runner of the ball. He's big enough to handle a workload. He's got speed. He's got explosiveness. He knows how to get it done on the goal line. And he has the upside for multiple avenues. If Aaron Jones gets hurt this year, if his play declines, if they run the ball enough, if he moves on in free agency, he's a good investment right now for a mid to late second round pick. I have him in a lot of dynasty leagues because I think he's a good investment for both contenders if you need running back depth and rebuilders if you're just looking for some value accumulation. There's no real ripple effect here aside from, Lou Nichols, who they drafted in the 7th round. I think if that backfield's wiped clean in 2024, Jones is gone, Dillon is gone, maybe he's a guy that is worth a taxi squad stash, and I talked about him as a guy that I'm stashing on a lot of my taxi squads for that reason. Number 8 on this list is Antonio Gibson, running back 36 per keep trade cut. I feel like a broken record talking about the 2020 running back class and all of these guys being inconsistent, all of them being, having dealt with injury, because Gibson has dealt with toe injuries, he's dealt with shin injuries, causing him to lose his workhorse role that he had during the 2021 season and parts of this past year and 2020 as well. He's now in a split backfield with Brian Robinson. I expect it to be a split backfield. I don't think either of them is going to take over the workload completely. I've been on record saying that I think this offense is better than people think. I think that the weapons around Sam Howell are good, with Terry, with Jahan Dotson, with the 2 running backs, Curtis Samuel, all those guys. And also, I think these 2 running backs are going to be heavily involved in the game plan, because I think they have one of the better 1-2 punches in the league. J.D. McKissic is now gone out of this backfield, and that is really crucial for Antonio Gibson, because he can now take over the primary passing down back in this backfield, because we know Brian Robinson is not really equipped to do that. He averaged a 29.1% route participation, Gibson did, while J.D. McKissic was on the field last year. From weeks 1 to 8, he was not running routes nearly as much as he should be as a former wide receiver going back to his days in college. When McKissic was gone, when he was put on IR with a neck injury, he was up to 53.9% of the routes. So we have a guy that can legitimately run routes, get targets on the field. I believe this backfield will be split, like I said, but if you get an ambiguous situation, both guys have, inherent upside if the other one misses time. Brian Robinson is the guy that I actually prefer in Dynasty, because if Gibson is a free agent, I don't expect him to be brought back. And Brian Robinson maybe can command a bigger workload by year 3 of his career. But either way, I think both of these guys are good investments. And Antonio Gibson, especially at his price point, you can get him for a late 2nd rounder, an early 3rd rounder in some cases. And not only could he be solid this year, he could move on as an unrestricted free agent next year and go to a team that's going to use him maybe more out of the backfield, or maybe more as like a 50 to 60% opportunity share running back, depending on how good he is this year. So to close this video out, I have a couple other guys that I wanted to mention. Number 9 is Damien Harris and Rashaad Penny. Both of these guys are in the 40s of keep trade cut rankings, and both of these guys are talented, but both of them were banged up last year. So they signed 1-year prove-it deals. I expect both of them to be the primary goal line back for some of the best offenses in the league. Damien Harris of the Buffalo Bills, Rashaad Penny of the Philadelphia Eagles. I absolutely love these guys as low-cost acquisitions if you guys are contending, especially if you have a deep starting lineup, right? If you have 2 running back spots and 4 flexes or whatever, these guys can be had for cheap. The ripple effect of these 2 backfields is, obviously, if I'm higher on Damien Harris of the Bills and Rashaad Penny of the Eagles, then I'm lower on James Cook and DeAndre Swift. The way I look at these 2 offenses is I got 2 mobile quarterbacks. Neither of them are likely to throw to their running backs very often, and James Cook and DeAndre Swift, that's how they make their money. So give me the guy that is going to be on the goal line scoring touchdowns for 2 of the best offenses in the NFL, and I believe both of these guys are talented running backs. Damien Harris and Rashaad Penny have shown high-end production in the past. Rashaad Penny closed out last season very strong, or 2 seasons ago very strong. Damien Harris has finished as a top 20 running back in points per game before, and both of these guys can score touchdowns. I think they're perfect examples of why some of the smarter teams in the NFL can just go cheap at running back and get good production still, because both of these guys can play, and I think both of them are threats to put up 250 carries this year, and they're some of the cheapest running back production you can find at this point in time. So number 10, to close out this video, Derrick Henry and Joe Mixon. I'm probably out on these guys in most formats, but it is worth noting that they're in contract years, and since this video is about running back contract situations, they definitely bear mentioning. Derrick Henry will actually be a UFA this year, while Joe Mixon has a club option, and given how the rest of this offseason has gone for Joe Mixon, I don't think there's much he can do to avoid getting cut this time next year. In redraft, I think Derrick Henry is too expensive, but in Dynasty, I actually don't hate the price point because it's baked into his cost right now. He's like a 9th, 10th round pick in some league markets. If he's a 5th, 6th round pick in your league market, I do not like that cost. But if you're in a league market with sharper players that realize older running backs are not good investments, then I actually don't mind Derrick Henry. He's potentially a Hall of Fame caliber running back, and he's got a good case for actually making the Hall of Fame with a 2,000-yard season under his belt, a number of seasons of great production. It's very possible that given his size, given his advanced outlier status already, because he's already well above the age apex, well above the touch apex, he could be relevant for another 1 to 2 years. Tennessee could use him again this year to aid their young quarterback, Will Levis, or hell, maybe he's shopped mid-season, or maybe he's traded even before the season starts. And either way, I think you're getting a potential outcome where Derrick Henry has one more running back one season. Maybe he's an RB2 for 2 years after that. I don't think he's terrible in Dynasty if you're in a league market where running backs are slightly devalued, because then you're getting a discount on him, but don't draft him in league markets that behave like redraft leagues because he's probably going way too high. in that type of format. And Joe Mixon, I don't want anything to do with him. In redraft, in Dynasty, I don't care that he has a good projection. He's washed up. He's probably going to get cut at some point, and I believe that this backfield is going to be better off without him. So if you made it to the end of this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. We really appreciate the support this time of year. Also, leave any comments down below, and also be sure to check out all of our sponsors, all of our links down below in the description. Go check out our site, flockfantasy.com/FSE is how you can get access to all my Dynasty rankings, bonus articles, trade value charts, all the running back age apex data that I've referenced in this video and the last video are now posted to the site as well. And by using the promo code FSE, you can get a 30% off discount. An annual package. Right now, we're running a special promotion where you get a free Zoom consultation to talk with me or with Danny about anything that you want to talk about, your Dynasty teams, redraft teams, best ball teams, whatever you want to talk about. That is free for you if you sign up annually on our site. You'll also get a 2-day free trial by using our code to check out everything that you want to see before you determine that it is worth your value, it is worth your money. We definitely want to make sure that we are giving you guys something that is actually valuable. So check out all of our sponsors as well, Underdog Fantasy, Aura, everybody down below in the description, Elite Picks if you guys are sports bettors as well. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.